Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever felt like you didn't fit in? Imagine moving into your dream home, but your neighbors look at you like you are a problem to be solved. Today, we are following the story of the Harrison family. They just moved into Whispering Pines, a very wealthy and very strict neighborhood. But there is a problem. The Harrisons don't drive a luxury car, and they don't care about status symbols. They are different, and the neighborhood watch is already keeping a very close eye on them. In this video, we're going to learn how to handle social pressure and judgmental people. While we watch the story, pay attention to the vocabulary we use to describe social status and conflict. This is a story about staying true to yourself when everyone else wants you to change. Let's get started with Chapter 1, The New Beater on the Block. The sun was setting over the golden gates of Whispering Pines as the Harrison family arrived. Their old station wagon made a loud, rhythmic rattling sound as it crawled up the pristine driveway. To Mark and Elena, the car was a reliable friend that had carried them through 10 years of life. But to the people of Whispering Pines, the car was an eyesore on their perfect street. Mark turned off the engine, and the car let out one final, tired puff of smoke. "We are finally here," Elena said, looking at the beautiful brick house they had bought. It was a fixer-upper, a house that needed a lot of work, but it was their ticket to a better school district. Their teenage son, Leo, looked out the window and noticed a curtain move in the house next door. A woman was standing there, staring at their dented trunk and the mismatched boxes tied to the roof. She didn't wave or smile. She simply wrote something down on a small notepad. "I think the neighborhood watch is already on duty," Leo muttered, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. They began to unload their belongings: a weathered sofa, a collection of mismatched lamps, and boxes of old books. Every time a luxury SUV drove past, the driver would slow down just enough to stare at the scene. It felt like they were being inspected by a group of judges rather than being welcomed by neighbors. "Just ignore them," Mark said, lifting a heavy box. "We worked hard for this house, and we belong here." But as the evening grew cold, the silence of the neighborhood felt heavy and unfriendly. They weren't just moving into a new house, they were moving into a battle for respect. As the lights went on in the mansions around them, the Harrisons felt like small islands in a sea of judgment. The first day was over, but the real challenge of fitting in was just beginning. The next morning, the sun revealed every crack in the Harrisons' driveway and every dent in their old car. Elena decided to start the day with a positive attitude, hoping a friendly smile would break the ice. She walked toward the edge of the lawn to check the mail, noticing how quiet and empty the street felt. Suddenly, a woman in a perfectly tailored white tracksuit appeared from behind a tall hedge. This was Victoria, the president of the local Homeowners Association and the unofficial ruler of the block. "Good morning. You must be the new residents," Victoria said, her eyes sliding over Elena's faded t-shirt. She didn't offer a hand to shake, but instead held out a thick, heavy folder bound in blue plastic. "I am Victoria, and this is the Whispering Pines Handbook of Standards and Aesthetics," she announced. Elena took the folder, surprised by how heavy it felt, as if it were filled with bricks instead of paper. "We have very specific rules here regarding lawn height, exterior paint colors, and, of course, vehicle storage," Victoria continued. She pointed a manicured finger toward the old station wagon, which looked even rustier in the bright morning light. "We prefer that all non-current model vehicles be kept inside a closed garage at all times to maintain property values."
Elena felt a flush of heat rise to her face, but she kept her voice calm and polite. "The garage is currently full of moving boxes, but we will move the car as soon as we can," Elena explained. Victoria gave a thin, tight smile that did not reach her eyes and checked a box on her notepad. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Victoria said, though it sounded more like a warning than a greeting. Elena watched her walk away, feeling like she had just been interviewed for a job she didn't want. Back inside, the family sat around the kitchen table, looking at the long list of things they were already doing wrong. They hadn't even unpacked their dishes yet, and they were already being told they didn't belong. By the end of the first week, the Harrisons decided to focus on their backyard instead of the strict rules of the front yard. Mark and the kids began digging up a patch of dry grass to plant a vibrant organic vegetable garden. They wanted to grow tomatoes, peppers, and tall sunflowers to make the house feel like a real home. However, the sound of their shovels seemed to act as an alarm for the rest of the neighborhood. Within an hour, a man from across the street stood on his sidewalk, crossing his arms and shaking his head. "That is not approved greenery," Leo whispered, mimicking the serious tone of the HOA handbook. At school, the pressure was even worse for Leo and his sister as they tried to navigate the hallways. While other students carried designer backpacks and wore shoes that cost more than a month's rent, the Harrison kids wore comfortable, thrifted flannel. They noticed groups of students whispering and pointing at their shoes during the lunch break. "Is it true your car broke down on the way to the grocery store?" one boy asked with a mocking laugh. Leo realized that in Whispering Pines, your value as a person was measured by the labels on your clothes. Back at home, the family received their first official mail, a bright orange notice of violation. The letter stated that their garden was inconsistent with the uniform landscape of the community. It felt like the neighborhood was trying to erase their personality and replace it with a boring green lawn. Mark looked at the orange paper and then at his excited children holding their seed packets. "A lawn is just grass," Mark said firmly, "but a garden is life. We are keeping it." It was a small act of rebellion, but it drew a clear line in the sand between them and the neighbors. The Harrisons were choosing their values over the labels that everyone else worshipped. That night, as they ate dinner, they knew the real battle over their lifestyle was only just beginning. Monday morning arrived with a chilling surprise that waited for Mark on the driveway. As he walked toward the old station wagon, he noticed a bright white piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. He pulled it out, expecting another official HOA notice, but there was no logo or signature on this page. The message was printed in large, bold letters. "This is a prestigious neighborhood. Park your trash elsewhere." Mark felt a surge of anger, his fingers tightening around the paper until it was a crumpled ball in his hand. He looked around the quiet street, but every window was blank and every door was closed tight. The neighborhood felt like a beautiful, expensive fortress designed to keep people like him out. Later that afternoon, Elena noticed a black car idling slowly at the end of their driveway for several minutes. It didn't move until she stepped onto the porch, then it sped away with a loud screech of tires. "They are trying to intimidate us," Elena said softly as the family gathered in the kitchen that evening. Leo admitted that he had started walking a different way home from the bus stop to avoid the stairs. The pressure was moving from formal letters to personal attacks, and the air in the house felt heavy with stress. "We have a choice," Mark said, laying the crumpled note on the table for everyone to see. "We can hide the car in the back or cover it with a tarp, or we can keep living our lives." The family looked at each other, seeing the fear but also the stubborn pride in each other's eyes. They decided that hiding was a form of admitting defeat, and they weren't ready to lose their dignity. That night,
Mark installed a small motion light over the driveway to keep an eye on their property. As the bright light flickered on for the first time, it felt like a small lighthouse in a very dark sea. The note was a warning, but the Harrisons were beginning to realize they were stronger than a piece of paper.
The neighborhood's annual Heritage Gala was an event that no one in Whispering Pines dared to miss. Elena and Mark decided to attend, hoping that meeting people face-to-face would finally humanize their family. They arrived in their best clothes, clean and neat, but clearly not the $1,000 silk gowns worn by the other women. The moment they stepped into the ballroom, the music seemed to dip, and a dozen pairs of eyes assessed them. Victoria stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne like a scepter and ignoring their entrance. Conversations died down as the Harrisons walked toward the buffet, making the clinking of their plates sound like thunder. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen area, followed by the panicked shouting of the event coordinator. A massive tray of appetizers had collapsed, and the gourmet catering team was stuck behind a delivery truck that had broken down. While the wealthy neighbors stood around whispering in shock, Elena didn't hesitate to move toward the chaos. She spent years working in busy community centers, and she knew exactly how to manage a crisis under pressure. "Mark, grab those extra tables. Kids, help me rearrange these platters," Elena commanded with a confident smile. Within 20 minutes, she had organized the staff, salvaged the food, and created a beautiful, rustic display. The guests began to eat, realized the food was delicious, and the tension in the room started to melt away. A few neighbors even walked up to Mark to ask how he had fixed the broken service elevator so quickly. They were surprised to learn that a man who drove an old beater also possessed the skills of a master engineer. Victoria watched from the corner, her mouth a tight line, as she saw her neighbors actually laughing with the Harrisons. For a few hours, the labels and the car didn't matter. Only the family's genuine kindness and hard work were visible. The gala was supposed to be the Harrisons' social defeat, but it turned into their first small victory. They left the party with a few real smiles directed their way, though they knew Victoria wouldn't forget this night. The small victory at the gala did not last long, as the neighborhood's watch became more intense than ever. Mark noticed 3 new high-tech security cameras installed on the neighbor's roof, all pointed directly at their front door. Every time the family stepped outside, a red light on the cameras would blink, following their every move. Even the private security guards in the neighborhood started to patrol their street twice as often as before. One afternoon, Leo invited 2 friends from his old school over to work on a science project in the backyard. Within 10 minutes, a security patrol car pulled up to the curb with its lights flashing quietly. The guard claimed there was a report of suspicious individuals entering the property through the side gate. "These are my friends, and this is our home," Leo said, his voice trembling with both anger and embarrassment. The guard took their names and checked their IDs, while Victoria watched from her balcony with a cold expression. It became clear that the neighbors weren't just watching for crime, they were watching for any sign of wrongness. The Harrisons felt like they were living inside a glass box where every private moment was being judged. Even a simple pizza delivery or a late-night light in the kitchen seemed to trigger a phone call to the HOA. "They want us to feel uncomfortable so that we decide to leave on our own," Elena realized during dinner. The family started to whisper inside their own house, afraid that the sensitive microphones on the cameras might hear them. Mark decided to buy several tall, thick trees to plant along the fence line to regain some of their privacy. But as soon as the delivery truck arrived with the trees, Victoria was there with her notepad and a frown. "The height of those trees is restricted by Section 4 of the bylaws," she said, without even saying hello.
The feeling of being hunted in their own sanctuary began to take a serious toll on the family's spirit. They were learning that in Whispering Pines, safety was often just another word for total control.
A sudden, heavy rainstorm hit Whispering Pines, turning the perfect streets into rushing rivers of water. Mark was in the garage when he heard a frantic pounding on the front door in the middle of the night. It was Victoria's husband, a man who usually looked down his nose at the Harrisons from his luxury sedan. "Our basement is flooding, and the high-tech drainage system has completely failed," he shouted, looking terrified. Mark grabbed his old toolbox and followed the man into the most expensive mansion on the block. Inside, the house was beautiful, but as Mark stepped into the basement, he saw a shocking sight. The walls were covered in expensive art, but behind a hidden door, he saw stacks of past due notices. Victoria's husband noticed Mark looking and turned a deep shade of red, his shoulders finally dropping. "We haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months," the man whispered, his voice cracking with shame. "The fancy cars are leased, the clothes are on credit, and we can't even afford a real plumber." Mark didn't say a word. He simply went to work, using his hands to clear a blockage in the main pipe. He realized that the perfect neighbors were actually living in a house of cards that was falling down. All the judgment and the strict rules were just a way for them to hide their own financial failures. Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs, her expensive hair ruined by the rain and her face pale. She saw Mark, the man she had called a nuisance, saving her home while her wealthy friends ignored her calls. "Thank you," she said, her voice small and lacking its usual sharp, arrogant edge. Mark finished the job, wiped his greasy hands on a rag, and gathered his old tools to leave. He walked back to his own fixer-upper house, feeling a strange sense of peace for the first time. The Harrisons might have an old car, but they owned their lives, while the neighbors were owned by their debt. Despite the secret Mark now knew, the official pressure from the HOA did not stop. Victoria seemed even more aggressive, perhaps because she was ashamed that Mark had seen her struggle. A new letter arrived on Monday, printed on bright red paper to signal an urgent hearing. The neighborhood board was accusing the Harrisons of multiple aesthetic violations that lowered property values. They cited the old station wagon, the vegetable garden, and even the non-standard height of their new trees. If the family did not fix everything in 48 hours, they would face a massive daily fine. "This is it," Mark said, looking at the total amount, which was more than their monthly mortgage. "They want to bankrupt us, so we are forced to sell the house and leave," Elena realized. To make matters worse, someone had spray-painted a large, ugly X on their old car overnight. Leo stood in the driveway, looking at the ruined paint of the car he had helped his father fix. "Why do they hate us so much?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mix of sadness and anger. Mark felt his patience snap, but he didn't reach for a paintbrush or a lawyer's phone number. Instead, he walked over to the neighbor's house and knocked firmly on Victoria's massive front door. She opened it just an inch, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching them talk. "We are not moving, Victoria," Mark said, his voice low and steady like a drumbeat. "You can send all the red letters you want, but we know the truth about what is behind these walls." Victoria's face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the door until her knuckles turned white. The breaking point had been reached, and the Harrisons were no longer willing to play by the rules. It was time for a final confrontation, but it wouldn't happen in a courtroom or an HOA meeting. Instead of fighting with lawyers or angry letters, the Harrisons decided to do something unexpected. They spent the entire Saturday morning cleaning their backyard and setting up long wooden tables. Mark fired up the old charcoal grill, and the smell of seasoned chicken and roasted corn filled the air. Elena hand-wrote simple invitations and tucked them into every mailbox on the street. "Backyard BBQ at the Harrisons. Everyone is welcome," the notes read, in her neat, friendly cursive. At first, the street remained silent, and it seemed like no one would dare to cross the property line. Victoria watched from her window, her arms crossed tightly, waiting for the event to fail. But then the elderly couple from 2 doors down, who were tired of the neighborhood's coldness, walked over. They sat down, started eating, and realized that Mark and Elena were actually wonderful, hard-working people. Soon, a young couple with a crying baby joined them, grateful for a place where they didn't have to be perfect. The conversation wasn't about property values or luxury cars. It was about real life, hobbies, and family. One by one, the neighbors began to realize that the scary family with the old car was the kindest family on the block. They saw the vegetable garden not as an eyesore, but as a beautiful, living project. Even the kids from school showed up, and Leo showed them the science project he had been building in the garage. The neighborhood watch was finally watching something different, people actually talking and laughing together. Victoria eventually walked onto her porch, looking at the crowd and the glow of the string lights. She didn't come over, but she didn't call the police or the HOA either. The wall of judgment was finally cracking. The Harrisons hadn't changed their lifestyle to fit the neighborhood. They had changed the neighborhood to fit them. By showing their true selves, they turned a battlefield into a community, one plate of food at a time.
6 months had passed since the backyard barbecue, and the air in Whispering Pines felt different. The tall, golden gates were still there, but the tension that once lived behind them had started to fade. Mark pulled the old station wagon into the driveway, which was now lined with a thriving vegetable garden. The sunflowers were tall and bright, nodding their heads in the soft afternoon breeze. A neighbor walking her dog passed by and gave Mark a genuine, friendly wave. "Your tomatoes look great this year, Mark," she called out with a sincere smile. Even the HOA had stopped sending the dreaded orange and red envelopes to their mailbox. Victoria still lived next door, but she was no longer the queen of the neighborhood's rules. Her family had sold their luxury SUVs and replaced them with modest, sensible cars to pay off their debts. She didn't hide in her house anymore. Instead, she sometimes asked Elena for advice on starting her own garden. The Harrisons had learned that you don't need a fancy car to be a person of great value. They stayed true to their different lifestyle, and in doing so, they gave their neighbors permission to be real too. Leo and his sister walked home from the bus stop, laughing with a group of friends from the block. No one cared about the labels on their backpacks or the age of their father's garage tools. The neighborhood watch was still active, but now they watched out for each other's well-being instead of their mistakes. As the sun set, the lights in the Harrison house flickered on, warm and inviting. They had turned a house that wasn't welcome into a home that was the heart of the street. Real-life problems hadn't disappeared, but the family knew they could face anything with their heads held high. They weren't just the family with the old car anymore. They were the family that changed Whispering Pines forever.
The story of the Harrison family shows us that true value is not found in a bank account or a luxury car. It is found in the courage to be yourself, even when the people around you are judging your different lifestyle. By staying kind and working hard, the Harrisons turned a neighborhood of strangers into a real community. Remember, you don't need to fit into someone else's box to be a person of great respect and dignity. Sometimes the best way to change the world is simply to be the most authentic version of yourself. Thank you so much for watching the journey of the Harrison family in Whispering Pines. I hope this story helped you understand how to navigate social pressure while practicing your English. Now, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own neighborhood? Maybe because of your car, your house, or just your lifestyle? The Harrison family faced a lot of judgment in Whispering Pines, but they didn't give up. Let me know in the comments, what is one real-life problem you have faced with your neighbors? Now, it is time to test what you have learned. If you look in the description box below, you will find a link to a vocabulary quiz. This quiz covers all the new idioms and expressions we used in today's lesson, like breaking the ice, house of cards, and turning the tide. Make sure to complete the quiz to see how many new words you can remember. Also, check the chapter timestamps in the metadata if you want to go back and listen to a specific part of the story again. If you enjoyed this story about real-life problems, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Glisso for more lessons. See you in the next story. Goodbye.